It's good, brother.
So start with the Mangalycharna Prayers, which are found in the beginning of Bhagavad-gita as it is introduction. Om Agyan Timarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitanscha Hey Krishna Kunduna Sindho Dino Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopikanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Praying sincerely that everyone is healthy and happy in Krishna consciousness. And I sincerely beg the blessings, the assembled Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, that I may be able to be an instrument in talking and discussing about Bhagavad-gita as it is. We'll be going over chapter 10, texts 6 through 11. And I've titled this presentation, Knowing Krishna and Surrendering. So this will be the overall theme of these verses. And it seems like somebody's not muted. There's a little bit of a background noise. So Bhagavad-gita as it is. Hopefully everybody has their Bhagavad-gita as it is with them. And so starting with text. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, just to give a overview of what we've already studied. So Krishna is the origin of everything. And knowing that Krishna is the origin of everything, there's freedom to surrender. So when we look at the beginning verses of chapter 10, Krishna says that he's going to speak knowledge that is better than what he's already explained to Arjuna, and he talks about how by hearing about his opulences, understanding that he is the origin of all, one is freed from sinful reactions. And we can point back to chapter 7, text 28, Yesham Twanta Gatam Papam. Those who are free from papam, those who are free from sinful reactions and sin itself, by engaging in devotional service, what happens? Te dvandva moha nirmukta. They're free from the dualities of this world. So when one is full of reactions, immersed in the three modes of material nature, immersed in the materialistic perception of life, then one cannot see clearly. Their mind is always going to be absorbed in the dualities of this world, but being freed from sinful reactions. How do we become freed from sinful reactions? Understanding that Krishna is the origin of everything. And so in the beginning verses of chapter 10, he talks about how he is unborn, he's beginningless, one who knows us, freed from all sins, intelligence, knowledge, freedom from doubt and delusion, forgiveness, truthfulness, control of the senses, control of the mind, happiness and distress, birth, death, fear, fearlessness, non-violence, equanimity, satisfaction, austerity, charity, fame, and infamy. All these various qualities of living beings are created by me alone. And then verse 6, the 7 great sages, and before them the 4 other great sages, and the Manus come from me, born from my mind, and all the living beings populating the various planets descend from them. So Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, is talking about how he has so many opulences. He's the origin of all the qualities of living beings, and all living beings themselves come from Krishna. He's the origin of everything. And in the purport to text 6, Srila Prabhupada basically just talks about how the 7 great sages, Manus, Brahma, they're basically the Lord is giving a genealogical synopsis of the universal population. So just to express that everything is coming from Krishna, all the qualities, all living beings. And then in verse 7, Krishna states, Etam vibhuti yogam cham mama yo veti tattvataha so vipalkena yogena yujate natra sangshaya. One who is factually convinced of this opulence and mystic power of mine engages in unalloyed devotional service. Of this there is no doubt. So are we convinced? This is why we're studying Bhagavad-gita as it is. And this will come up many times throughout this presentation, that to be convinced about Krishna, Prabhupada says, is the highest summit of spiritual perfection. The highest summit of spiritual perfection is knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Generally, people know that God is great, but they do not know in detail how God is great. And this is why Krishna is speaking chapter 10, called Vibhuti Yoga, or knowledge of the Lord's opulences of the absolute. That Vibhuti, the opulences of the Lord, will be discussed in detail, because the more we know about his opulences, the more we understand exactly why God is great, how God is great. Otherwise, we're not going to be very convinced. We're going to have very weak faith. And we see this in a lot of religious people, not to point fingers at anybody at all, but a lot of us had to really start searching and understanding spiritual life different than how we were raised in religion. This is my case and many other people's cases, that you might be born into a particular religion and you have very sincere, very hard questions about the nature of God, about the nature of spirituality, and you don't get satisfactory answers all the time. And so there's this general idea that God is great, God is love, God is so many things. But this is the amazing knowledge that we have in Bhagavad-gita. It's really unparalleled. It's really an amazing scripture that's very different than many other scriptures because it goes into such detail of who Krishna is and what his opulences are. But what happens is Nietzsche comes along and destroys everything. No, just kidding. Kind of kidding. But why bring up Nietzsche? Because many people do not know that God is great. Srila Prabhupada is saying generally people know that God is great, but they do not know in detail how God is great. Well, that's changed drastically in this culture, and there's many spiritual scholars, religious scholars, and even secular scholars that point to the teachings of Nietzsche as really revolutionizing the idea of nihilism. Right? Nietzsche was very famous to give a story where there was a madman who was living apart from society, and this madman was absorbed in a higher reality, and he came down to share his realizations with all the people, but none of the people wanted to hear about his ideas. There's even a person who was speaking against this person and making him look like a fool. And this madman realized that God is dead. God is dead. We've killed God. And there's a lamentation about this. It's not a celebratory, God is dead, and now we're going to do whatever we want, but there's a lamentation that, okay, we've destroyed the basis of our reality, our morality, what's going to happen. Now, Nietzsche, later on in his works, talks about, well, the old gods are dead, and now man has to forge his own path, and this gives way to nihilism. Nihilism being in so many different ways of a kind of, we're going to figure out life on our own. And because of this revelation of people, which is actually coming from the external potency of the Lord, people place their faith that should be in God in so many different other ways. So one is faith in science. When we look at how science even really came about, it's amazing to look back at even how India gave so many technological advances to science, beginning with the number 0. If you look back in mathematics, there's very strong evidence that shunya, the number 0, was actually first used in India. And Pi Day just happened, what was it, last week or something? I forget which day it was, but pi 3.14, and then how even a lot of those numbers were given by those living in India in antiquity times. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. So science used to be a way to glorify the Lord's creation. But with nihilism, with destroying faith in God, people have taken up faith in science. But as we pointed out so many times, science does not answer all questions, right? Even what to speak of aesthetics. Science cannot touch upon aesthetics. Science can hardly touch upon morality. Science doesn't even touch upon consciousness. So people place their faith in science, people have place their faith in hedonism, just mundane sense gratification. That's the goal of life, is to just absorb yourself in enjoying the senses, getting as much money as possible, and there's really no meaning in life. So no meaning in life, nihilism, science, hedonism, and then false idols. We're placing our faith in false idols, and this is because we're not convinced of the opulence and mystic power of Krishna, we place our faith in false idols. We raise up so many celebrities. We look at our celebrity culture as it is, but we place our faith and worship in money, in hobbies, in so many things. We're giving our energy away to something other than God. When we think about worship, when we think about meditation, when we think about devotion, it's an energetic process. I'm giving my time, I'm giving my energy, I'm giving my concentration to God. But because we're not convinced of the opulence and mystic power of Krishna, then we place our faith in so many false idols. So we think there are other objects more worthy of our time and energy than God. Sambandha is important for us to become fixed in sincere devotional service. This is the last, in the last paragraph of the purport to verse 7. Srila Prabhupada says, when one is firmly convinced of the opulences of the Supreme Lord, he accepts Krishna with great faith and without any doubt, and he engages in devotional service. All this particular knowledge is required in order to increase one's interest in the loving devotional service of the Lord. One should not neglect to understand fully how great Krishna is, for by knowing the greatness of Krishna, one will be able to be fixed in sincere devotional service. So the very beginning of understanding Krishna and ourselves, this is called sambandha. Bandha means to put together. Sambandha, so just like Sankirtan, you're doing kirtan with everyone. So you're putting everything together in its proper ontological positions. So sambandha is the beginning of devotional service, to understand who is God, who is Krishna, to understand then who are we, what is our relationship with Krishna, sambandha, what is our relationship to put together. So what is our relationship with Krishna? What is our relationship with the material world? What is our relationship with Bhakti? So this is why Bhagavad-gita is the sambandha text that we have. It's going to tell us all these most important details of all relationships and how everything has its relationship with Krishna. And this is why 10th chapter is so important. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, a great acharya and great teacher in Bhagavad-gita, talks about this in the purport to the first verse of the 10th chapter, that the reason why Krishna is going over his opulences is so one will be able to be fixed in sincere devotional service. The more we know about Krishna, the more we know about ourselves. The more we know about Krishna's energies, the more we can spend time on Krishna, giving our energy in the proper way to Krishna. So very important to understand sambandha. So understanding the next verse is very deep. I put underneath Bhagavad-gita, chapter 10, text 8, Catuh-sloki. So verse 8 through 11, Catuh means four, Shloki means plural form of shloka or verses. Literally, this means four verses. These four verses are considered to be the essence of Bhagavad-gita. One who knows these four verses can really ascertain the essence of all the teachings given by Krishna in Bhagavad-gita. So this very important famous verse, Aham sarvasya prabhavo matta sarvam pravartite iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvitaha. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. Very clear statement by Krishna. Again, he's first stressing how he's the origin of he's the source of everything, as he's stated again and again in the beginning of this chapter. Everything emanates from him. We've seen how everything emanates from him. And again, to know this, one will be established in devotional service and worship Krishna with all their hearts. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada quotes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He quotes over and over from the Upanishads, from the Narayana Upanishad, Gopal Tapani Upanishad, from the Maha Upanishad, and on. He's quoting all of these Upanishad verses. So understanding Krishna through scriptures. A learned scholar who has studied the Vedas perfectly and has information from authorities like Lord Chaitanya and who knows how to apply these teachings can understand that Krishna is the origin of everything in both the material and spiritual world. So he gives so many Shastric references pointing to how Krishna is the source of everything. And Srila Prabhupada makes the statement that one who understands Krishna in such a way from a bona fide spiritual master with references from Vedic literature engages all his energy in Krishna consciousness and becomes a truly learned man. So for us, scripture is how we understand God. And talked about this a couple of times, but to understand through so many different ways this world, there's pratyaksha, anuman, and shabda. So we can acquire knowledge in primarily three ways: through our senses, which is pratyaksha, seeing, tasting, hearing, we get so much information. Anuman, inference. So inference, it means that we might see fire on a hilltop or mountain, and we can then understand that, well, where there's smoke, there's fire, so there must be a fire there. And Shabda is from understanding through the scriptures. And so our teachers have, and Krishna himself repeatedly shows us how scripture, especially the one can say the Upanishads, Bhagavad-gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, this is our greatest evidence of really understanding reality and God. And so in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 3, Text 21, stated, therefore, any person who seriously desires real happiness must seek a bona fide spiritual master and take shelter of him by initiation. Tasmat gurum prapadyate jigasu shreya uttamam. The qualification of the bona fide guru is that he has realized the conclusions of the scriptures by deliberation and is able to convince others of these conclusions. So this is the proper way of understanding Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada states in the purport also, Krishna conscious person should not be bewildered by fools. He should avoid all unauthorized commentaries and interpretations on Bhagavad-gita and proceed in Krishna consciousness with determination and firmness. So this is the benefit of having a bona fide spiritual master who's realized the conclusions of the scriptures by deliberation. One will have a very safe path and be able to go on with determination. The next verse in the Catuh-sloki, Bhagavad-gita, chapter 10, text 9, thoughts and conversation. So we've heard that those who understand that Krishna is the source of all spiritual and material worlds, they're very wise and they're going to worship him with all their hearts. Well, how do they worship Krishna? And these are the characteristics of the pure devotees. The thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. Their lives are fully devoted to my service. And they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. Mat chitta madgata prana bodhiyanta parasparam kantyantascha mam nityam tishanti cha ramanti cha. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada spends a lot of time, almost the entire purport is taken from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 19, where Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaches Srila Rupa Goswami, his disciple, about devotional service and how Brahmanda Brahmate Kona Bhagavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasade Bhai Bhakti Lata Bij, one who is in this material world is wandering from universe to universe, planet to planet, life to life, and the cycle of reincarnation, samsara, going around in cycles. But when one becomes very fortunate, then they get the grace of Guru by Krishna's grace, and the Guru will plant the bhakti lata bij, the seed of the devotional creeper in the heart of a disciple. And so Lord Chaitanya likens transcendental devotional service to the sowing of a seed in the heart of the living entity. And this devotional service is just like a seed, and if it is sown in the heart of a living entity, and if he goes on hearing and chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, that seed fructifies just as the seed of a tree fructifies with regular watering. The spiritual plant of devotional service gradually grows and grows until it penetrates the covering of the material universe and enters into the Brahma-jyoti effulgence in the spiritual sky. It then grows to reach the highest planet, which is called Goloka Vrindavan. Ultimately, the plant takes shelter under the lotus feet of Krishna and rests there. Gradually, as a plant grows fruits and flowers, that plant of devotional service also produces fruits, and the watering process in the form of chanting and hearing goes on. So today is the first day of spring, and Krishna states in this 10th chapter on verse 35 that he is of all seasons, he is the flower-bearing spring. So what a beautiful way to think of Krishna as flower-bearing spring, just as one performs devotional service, this creeper of devotional service, this tree, it grows up to the lotus feet of Krishna and produces flowers and fruits. And so Krishna is spring. And so just as we are beginning to water and take care of our plants outside, we have to also take care of this Bhakti Lata Bij, the seed of devotional service, and make sure that it grows properly. How is that done? Hearing and chanting about Krishna, and then enlightening one another and conversing about Krishna. Unless we hear, how can we speak? And Srila Prabhupada talks about Srimad Bhagavatam, the Puranam Amalam Yad Vaishnavanam Priyam. Srimad Bhagavatam is very dear to the devotees because it's full of narrations of Krishna and his devotees. And so Srimad Bhagavatam is so special because Srila Prabhupada states here, the realized souls in Krishna consciousness take continual pleasure in hearing this transcendental literature. In this narration, there's nothing about material activities, economic development, sense gratification, or liberation. It's the narration in which the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord and his devotees is fully described. And so hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, we can then speak, right? So unless we hear about Krishna, how can we speak about Krishna? So Shravanam, Kirtanam, hearing and chanting. And then by hearing and chanting comes Smaranam, remembering. So this is the crux of this entire verse that Srila Prabhupada very beautifully outlays in the purport. And did somebody have a question or something in the chat? For some reason, I'm not able to go into the chat right now while I'm sharing my screen because of the keynote.
About Prabhu in the chat, I'm posting my highlights.
Oh,
but not with the intention of interrupting you. Please go ahead.
Okay. So going to, well, actually I can stop and ask if there's any questions on these verses before we go to the next two. If anybody wants to add anything or have any reflections or have any questions. Otherwise, we'll go to the next two. All right. So going to verse 10, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pratipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupiyantite. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So Srila Prabhupada in the purport talks about, so in the verse, Krishna says, Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, so Buddhi Yoga. Srila Prabhupada says the goal is Krishna. And when one knows the goal and seeks Krishna completely in Krishna consciousness, he is acting in Buddhi Yoga. When a person knows the goal but is addicted to the fruits of activities, he is acting in Karma Yoga. When he knows the goal is Krishna, but he takes pleasure in mental speculations to understand Krishna, he is acting in Jnana Yoga. So, very important point here to understand these two terms, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, so that we can understand Buddhi Yoga, is that karma and jnana, right? So when we look at this one who is addicted to the fruits of activity. So one might know that the goal is God. The goal is to understand Krishna, but they're still attached and addicted to the fruits of activities. It's karma yoga. So, and when one knows the goal is Krishna, but takes pleasure in mental speculations to understand Krishna, he's acting in Gyan Yoga. And this is very important because karma and Gyan is based on one's own power, right? Karma yoga. You're thinking that I'm the doer, or I'm thinking that I'm the doer, because we're attached to the activity, the fruits of the activities. We perform an activity, whatever the result of that activity, I'm attached to that. I'm attached to God, yes, God is the goal, but still, I'm working. I'm the one taking care of the family. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm. It goes back to ahankara, false ego. You still think that you're the one in control. Just as in Jnana Yoga, you're thinking that, okay, Krishna is the goal, but I'm going to use my mind and my mental powers and my mental speculations to understand Krishna in a philosophical way. I'm going to do it. And so it's these two paths, karma yoga, jnana yoga, the understanding that the goal is Krishna, but you're thinking that you're the doer. It's based on my ability to get there. Whereas Buddha yoga is, as Srila Prabhupada states, in other words, Buddha yoga is the process when one tries to go back home, back to Godhead, and takes fully to Krishna consciousness and devotional service, his action is called Buddhi yoga. Buddhi means intelligence. Buddhi yoga itself is action in Krishna consciousness. And so when a person knows the goal of life, but is addicted to the fruits of activities, he's acting in karma yoga. When he knows that the goal is Krishna, but he takes pleasure in mental speculations to understand Krishna, he's acting in Jnana yoga. And when he knows the goal and seeks Krishna completely in Krishna consciousness and devotional service, he's acting in bhakti yoga or Buddhi yoga, which is the complete yoga. Now, why make these distinctions? Because in Buddhi yoga, what if you're not intelligent enough to make progress? What if you don't have the power, the ability to make progress on your own? Srila Prabhupada says, one might have a bona fide spiritual master and may be attached to a spiritual organization, but still he is not intelligent enough to make progress. Then Krishna from within gives him instruction so that he may ultimately come to him without difficulty. So we're taking away the I, and in Buddhi yoga, you're surrendering to Krishna. Krishna is going to reciprocate with your sincerity, with your devotion, so that it's not just you doing everything. So if we're not intelligent enough to make progress, that's not a problem. That's not an issue. Krishna's going to help us. And that's to those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. Whereas karma yoga, jnana yoga, it's all on you. If you don't have the ability, if you don't have the strength, you're not always going to get to the goal. But through Buddhi yoga, bhakti yoga, Krishna is going to reciprocate. If a devotee is not intelligent enough to make progress in the path of self-realization, but is sincere and devoted to the activities of devotional service, the Lord gives him a chance to make progress and ultimately attain him. And then the last verse we'll go over today, Tesham evanukam partam aham agyana jam tamaha nashyam yatma bhavasto jnana dipena bhasvata. The shining lamp, jnana dipena, to show them special mercy, I, dwelling in their hearts, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. So this goes back to not having to do it by yourself. So this connects with the previous verse on how it's not just about your abilities, but the Lord, he's going to show special mercy. What is he going to? Krishna's within everyone's hearts, and he's going to reveal everything, right? Just like a lamp, deep, right? We offer deep to the Lord, but deep means lamp. So with the shining lamp of knowledge, everything is revealed. Krishna is going to reveal everything by our sincerity. And this is seen with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the illiterate Brahmin that he meets in South India. There was a Brahmin who was instructed by a spiritual master to read every day the Bhagavad-gita. Just as we're reading Bhagavad-gita now, and we're not always saying the Sanskrit properly, sorry for any mispronunciation, but this Brahmin, he was really sincerely trying to read Bhagavad-gita every day. And he would go to Sri Rangam, very famous temple in South India, and he would sit down and he would try to read the Bhagavad-gita. And he would be ridiculed. There were other Brahmins around him who would ridicule him, and still he would keep going. So see his sincerity, right? Sometimes it's very hard to be sincere when everyone else is putting you down and ridiculing you and making fun of you. But his sincerity was very strong. And so Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw him attempting to read Bhagavad-gita. He went over to him, and the Brahmin revealed, my spiritual master told me to read Bhagavad-gita. Sometimes I read it properly, sometimes I don't read it properly, but still I'm surrendered to my spiritual master who's bona fide and trying to serve him. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was listening to this Brahmin reveal that he sees within his heart, as he's reading Bhagavad-gita, he sees within his heart Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield, and how beautiful Krishna is on being the charioteer of Arjuna, the relationship between them, and seeing Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield, he experiences deep emotional ecstasy. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then says, you are the authority on Bhagavad-gita. Because why? He's understanding the essence of Bhagavad-gita is to be attached to the Lord and the Lord's devotee, understanding the relationship between the Lord and the devotee, sambandha, and he's actually attached in loving to Krishna. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, you are the actual authority. There are other people who read Bhagavad-gita and they don't come to the conclusion that one should serve Krishna, that Buddhi Yoga or Bhakti Yoga is the way to obtain the goal. So Krishna, in the form of Lord Chaitanya, is revealing, especially through this illiterate Brahmin, sincerity. If you have sincerity, then Krishna is going to manifest himself within your heart. It's not by our mental speculation or fruitive activities. It's not actually by our power. It's by the power of love, which is bhakti. And Parikshit Maharaj being sincere. Parikshit Maharaj, in Srimad Bhagavatam, we hear how he was very sincere. Why was he so sincere to understand the goal of life? Because he had 7 days to live. So he went to the bank of the Ganga, sat down, and was determined to understand the goal of life. He was determined to really understand Krishna. And so Krishna reciprocated with Parikshit Maharaj by sending Shukadev Goswami. And we talk about this and kind of joke about it, but Parikshit Maharaj, he's sitting on the bank of the Ganga. He doesn't have cell phone, email, any way to contact Shukadev Goswami. Shukadev Goswami shows up by the, you could say, guidance of Krishna within his heart. There wasn't a message spread out throughout the universe that Parikshit Maharaj is going to do this. He sat down by himself on the bank of the Ganga, and sages started coming because they knew something amazing was going to take place. And Shukadev Goswami comes on the scene, prompted by the Lord because of Parikshit's sincerity. So when we're sincere and we're serving with love, Krishna's going to help us. So understanding the Lord by speculation, and the essence of the teachings of Bhagavad-gita is Srila Prabhupada in the last part of the purport. He talks about how due to the contamination of material association, through many, many millions of births, one's heart is always covered with the dust of materialism. But when one engages in devotional service and constantly chants Hare Krishna, the dust quickly clears and one is elevated to the platform of pure knowledge. So just by chanting the holy names, the Lord has made it so easy that his names are fully empowered to give us Vidyavadhu Jivanam. In the first Shikshastakam of Lord Chaitanya, it's stated that Vidyavadhu Jivanam, it's the source of all knowledge. Everything's going to be revealed because of that, quickly covering all of that dust that's in our chitta. So Tesham Evanukam Partam Jnana Dipena, cleansing out all the ignorance, and one will be able to understand the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal, Vishnu, can be attained only by this chant and by devotional service, and not by mental speculation or argument. And this is something that is stated over and over in the scriptures again and again and again, that it's only by bhakti, not by speculation or argument. The pure devotee does not have to worry about the material necessities of life. He need not be anxious, because when he removes the darkness from his heart, everything is provided automatically by the Supreme Lord, who is pleased by the loving devotional service of the devotee. This is the essence of the teachings of Bhagavad-gita. By studying Bhagavad-gita, one can become a soul completely surrendered to the Supreme Lord and engage himself in pure devotional service. As the Lord takes charge, one becomes completely free from all kinds of materialistic endeavors. And so, to understand the essence of Bhagavad-gita, we have to read Bhagavad-gita, and the essence is that the Lord is going to take charge. And this is a very powerful meditation that is a struggle all through spiritual life, is that aham amadi paramo. We think that we are the doers. It's all about us trying to understand Krishna, right? There's a great meditation of Israel, who Jacob, he is struggling with God. He is wrestling with God, and he becomes known as Israel, one who struggles with God. And we're not meant to struggle against God, but when we keep our false ego in the forefront, then there's going to be a struggle, because God's getting in the way of me, of I. But this is why these 4 verses known as Catuh-sloki are so important to really reveal on how Krishna, when one is sincere and full of loving devotional service, then Krishna takes charge, kicks out all of the ignorance, and we're able to actually understand God. And when we're able to understand Krishna, then we can really perform devotional service. So these are going through verses 6 through 11, chapter 10. And yeah, if anybody has any comments or questions, Vijay Krishna Prabhu posted in the chat some highlights. Kelvin, yes, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. I don't want to take time away from another participant, though. I
Sure,
talk
go ahead.
now? I was just wondering, as I've read through, the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad-gita and the Chaitanya Charitamrita and various literatures, and I've noticed that the name of the Supreme God Krishna is also referred to as Narayana sometimes, and also in other places Vishnu. And I noted that it had occurred in these verses that we've been talking about today too in the Bhagavad-gita. So, for example, in the purport to 10.8, Narayana is frequently mentioned. Then on the next, that's on page 516, but on the next page, 517, it's Krishna that gets the credit for being the supreme source of everything. And then on page 522, the last paragraph in the purport to verse 10.11, the text says the ultimate goal, Vishnu, can be attained only by this chant and by devotional service. And I was wondering if you could speak about when or what the differences are between Vishnu, Krishna. I know there are three Vishnus that Krishna expands into, but when in the literature is Krishna referred to directly, and when is Vishnu referred to, and when is Narayana referred to? Is there some rule or something underlying in the Sanskrit or the process of devotional service about when you refer to Krishna in different forms?
Yeah, it's a nice question for understanding when these names are brought up. So Narayan, Vishnu, Krishna, and all names of God are actually all the same, but in different. Yeah, there's no difference between these different names, as Srila Prabhupada and our Acharyas point out. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Nam Namakari Bahudha Nija Sarvashaktis Chacharpita, that all these names of God, of which there are so many because of different activities or different qualities that are being addressed in different names to God, but they're all quite powerful and directly God himself. Now, when we get into the differences of the names of God, like Krishna, Narayan, and Vishnu, Krishna is used to refer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So when we look at Narayan and Vishnu's, as you pointed out, there's expansions of Krishna. And when we use the names Narayan and Vishnu, this usually denotes the incarnations coming from Krishna, whereas Krishna is known as Swayam Bhagavan, the original, and this is why Srila Prabhupada uses the term Supreme Personality of Godhead. There can be so many personalities of Godhead, so many incarnations, but Krishna is known as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But still, Narayan, Vishnu, Krishna, they're all one, as I forget the exact Brahma Samhita verse, but it's all of them are likened to candles. One candle lights another candle, lights another candle. So all these forms and names of Krishna are one in one sense, but then they denote different moods, relationships, and
Yes, relationships. I was thinking that it could be like maybe if you were a child and had a friend, you refer to the friend in a particular way. But your father may refer to your childhood friend in a different way. And certainly your friend's mother refers to him in a different way. And yet you're all talking about the same entity because people have different relationships with who they're talking about.
Yeah. That's nice. Yeah, nice reflection. Yeah.
That was my only question. So thanks for taking the time to answer it.
Yeah. Nice to hear from you, Calvin. Any other comments, questions, reflections?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you. Obeisances. So I was just wondering, just like when you speak about karma yoga, nishkam karma yoga, there's some nuances there, some differences. Now, when you're speaking about Sankhya yoga, bhakti yoga, Buddha yoga, like it says, they're really, what does Krishna say? Sankhya and bhakti, it's really the same kind of thing. But are there nuances? Because we always say we're bhakti yogis. We don't say we're Buddha yogis and Sankhya yogis and all that. So if they're like the same, what are the nuances? Can you enlighten us on this?
Yeah, that's yeah, we can go through the whole Bhagavad-gita and see how Krishna is talking about so many different yogic processes. So yeah, the Buddha yoga here is specifically referring to bhakti yoga, and this is specifically stated by Srila Prabhupada in his purport, where he talks versus karma yoga and jnana yoga. So yoga itself means to link up with the Supreme. And we see Krishna in Bhagavad-gita talk about how Sankhya yoga, Sankhya literally means to count. So the Sankhya yogis, they count the different material elements and try to get to the Supreme by counting. The yogis try to get to the Supreme by performing the Ashtanga yoga process, which Krishna specifically goes through in the 6th chapter, Dhyana yoga. So you have karma yoga, jnana yoga delineated in the 3rd chapter and 4th chapters Bhagavad-gita. And then as you brought up, Naishkarma yoga, which is delineated in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad-gita. But then these middle chapters of 7 through 12, they specifically talk about bhakti yoga. And so then again, this goes back to how in the other types of yogas, the main nuance, so Krishna actually states that Sankhya yoga and Dhyana yoga are the same. Sankhya yoga is more of the theoretical, Dhyana yoga is more of the experiential, is that the proper word? Experience version of Sankhya. But Bhakti yoga is where you're particularly surrendering to the Lord. And so this is why Krishna then at the end of Bhagavad Gita says, Sarva Dharman Pratyaja, Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. Forget all these other Sankhya yogas, Dhyana yogas, Karma yogas, Jnana yogas. Just surrender unto me. And this is Bhakti yoga. So Buddha yoga in verses 10 and verse 10 of the 10th chapter, Buddha yoga is specifically talking about bhakti yoga. So there's a lot more nuances to go through. Even reading how I was just reading yesterday in the pastime of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Srila Prabhupada talks about how those who are following Patanjali yoga or Ashtanga yoga or Dhyana yoga, the ultimate goal is to merge into the body of Krishna. Now the Jnanis, those who perform Jnana yoga, so here's a nuance between Jnana yoga and Ashtanga Yoga. In Jnana Yoga, the goal is to merge into the impersonal Brahma Jyoti effulgence of God. Whereas Srila Prabhupada states that those who follow Patanjali, they're even more, how would you say, misguided, because they actually want to merge into the body of Krishna. So the Brahman effulgence is the effulgence that's made of the living entities, particles, and it's the glaring effulgence of the body. But the Patanjali yogis, they want to merge into the body of God and become one with God. And so they're even more misguided. And yeah, so there's so many nuances. Now, all of these are trying to get rid of material suffering and obtain liberation. But, and if anybody wants to do a painstaking, super intense study, Bhakti Sandarbha by Srila Jiva Goswami, like almost like the entire Bhakti Sandarbha is pointing out that through these yoga systems that are predominated by karma and gyan, one cannot actually attain real liberation. Actually, the only real transcendental happiness is going to be obtained by bhakti yoga or buddhi yoga, because that is our actual natural position. Jiveras Rupahoy Krishna Nityadas. We are the eternal servants of Krishna. And until we actually take to bhakti, which is the abhideya, the process to reach the real goal. So this goes back to Srila Prabhupada's purports of understanding the goal is Krishna. If we perform any other type of abhideya, gyan karma, sankhya, it's actually not going to get us to the real goal, so that we're never actually going to obtain that highest liberation. Sorry to go on for so long. I hope that answers your question. And if not, please chastise me and correct me with your words of wisdom.
Thanks a lot, Prabhu. Yeah, it's a fascinating study, and I really appreciate how you expressed it. And thank you for your very nice class, and looking forward to more. Hare Krishna.
Any other comments or questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Vijay Krishna Prabhu.
But it is already 8 past your time. May I? Eight minutes past your time.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, okay. So my question is related to the Catuh-sloki chosen by you for today's class, and specifically to text 9, chapter 10, the opulence of the absolute, text 9. In the translation to this text, the quote that I find is as follows: "They derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me." And because of this quote, it immediately came to my mind the text 59 from chapter 2, contents of the Gita summarized, which goes as follows. Quote, "The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness." Unquote. So based on this text, 59 from chapter 2, because of the quote from text 9 in chapter 10, my question is as follows. My question is related to the word great. Krishna is not just saying they derive satisfaction. No, he specifically says great satisfaction. So related to the word great, my question is, why is it, philosophically asking, why is it that, in other words, is it that this great satisfaction is what we need in order to stop being non-conscious? Or in what measure this great satisfaction helps us to become fixed in consciousness? And when we become fixed in consciousness, we stop with the nonsensical engagements, which ultimately are not different from the suicidal course. Because something must be there related to Krishna, deriving from our association with Krishna, which has the power to make us stop being nonsensical and making us stop to choose the self-destructive path. So I think that this quote from chapter 10, great satisfaction and bliss is the solution for the problem. Is it that I'm right, or is it that I am wrong? But because Prabhu, I'm sorry. I am asking like this because nowadays, because of nihilism and God is dead, people think that the solution for the problems is more or less the building of nuclear weapons in order to compete against each other, for us to gain full power, because we think that we are right, the others are wrong, we have the right way of administrating this world. So even if it is necessary to a nuclear war, why not? So people do not believe in the present days that just conversing about God will satisfy us in such a way that we wouldn't be there even in our worst nightmares, thinking about the building of nuclear weapons in order to win over the others, because we think that we know best.
Yeah, right. You're absolutely right. And
Prabhu, the question is, how do you prove scientifically that just discussion about God will solve the problems?
Well, that's actually one of the problems, is that we can't prove it scientifically. Scientific method is based on material understanding, and this is something that's coming up more and more and as you said in the purport to verse 9, Srila Prabhupada says, in the preliminary stage of devotional service, they relish the transcendental pleasure from the service itself, and in the mature stage, they are actually situated in love of God. So in the verse that you're talking about, they derive great satisfaction and bliss from always enlightening one another and conversing about me. We also have to include the others, that the thoughts of pure devotees dwell in Krishna and their lives are fully devoted to service. So to put it all in context, yes, we need to converse about God, we need to speak about God, but we also need to perform devotional service in a practical way, helping others converse about God and also having our thoughts dwell on God. Now, to prove scientifically, now this is quite a problem, because the scientific method doesn't go along with transcendence. Otherwise, we'd be able to prove that there's a God using material standards. But that which is transcendental, that which is beyond material, cannot be shown effectively using material standards. And Atta Sri Krishna na madi na bhaved grayam indriyai, right? Grayam, grab. You can't grab transcendence with anything physical or material, but you can see susukam kartum avyayam. You can see that those who are engaged in spiritual life, they're peaceful, they're kind, they have, and this is shown in Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad-gita, that one who takes to spiritual life, they are imbued with transcendental qualities, 26 qualities of a Vaishnav, that will enable the world to become a more peaceful place. And this is why Srila Prabhupada talks in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam about creating a competitionless society, and where NATO and all of these other things have failed to make a peaceful society, one will actually, as you said, quoting from 259, you'll actually be able to experience Vishayavani Vartante. We might be attached to the sense objects, but by talking about Krishna, we're going to get a higher taste. And by getting that higher taste, we're going to let go of our lower modes, which will help the world not seek after nuclear weapons. So yeah, we actually can't use the scientific method to show transcendence.
Yes, Bal Prabhu, as usual, wonderful answer to my question. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for your kind attention tonight. And Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Jayate. If I was able to say anything proper, it's by the blessings of Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. And if I said anything wrong, it is my own inability to effectively be an instrument in Krishna consciousness. Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyascha Patitanam Pavanebhyo
Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Thank you,
Bhagavad-gita as it is, Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada, Ki Jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.